So thank you for coming this morning. This has been a bit of a complex logistical exercise. It's been a bit like the vaccine rollout, trying to put all the pieces together. So I've been making sourdough for the last 12 years. So this is my starter, which I've had bubbling away for the last 12 years. So I do it all very instinctively now. So it took a lot of thinking to work out how to break it down and to try and show it all in one thing rather than the whole process. So I've got each stage of the process to show you. And we are recording this, so we'll stick it up on YouTube afterwards as well, so that anything that's confusing, you can go back and look at. Also, I'm sure that basically where I've got to after 12 years, I've got to something which works reliably for me and is really simple. I'm sure a proper baker would tell me there's all kinds of things I'm doing wrong and all kinds of things I could improve, but this is just what works for me and doesn't take too much effort, and as I say, is now very instinctive. I can't remember why I started doing this, but 12 years ago, I think it was reading a Hugh Fernie Whittingstall book, the River Cottage Bread book, I think, was what triggered me, and I started my first starter and have been going since then. So yeah, this beauty is 12 years old and still going strong if I go away. Remember when we used to go away? When I used to go away, it lasts, just I thicken it up, make it into more kind of a dough, stick it in the fridge, and it will easily last 2 weeks in the fridge. So I've managed to keep it alive for the past 12 years. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by talking through the stages and get a loaf in the oven. And then we'll come back and talk about things like how to make a starter and what kind of flour to use and all that kind of stuff. And there'll be opportunities at that point to ask any questions you might have, or you can stick them in the chat if you want. But we'll get going with my basic sourdough loaf. So, a bowl on a scale, and my...
Do you want me to lift that up?
No.
The flour?
That's fine. So I put in 500 grams of flour. As I say, it's still very intuitive and just what I've worked out what works for me. So 500 grams, about a pound of flour. There. And then salt, so between 10 and 15 grams of salt. And again, that's really a question of experimentation, see what you like. So I think 10 is probably the minimum. 15 will give you quite a salty loaf. So I normally settle for around about 12 grams. That's done. Get rid of that. And then I give it a bit of a whisk, just to mix the salt in and to aerate it a bit. And I'm going to talk about this more when I talk about how to make the starters and stuff. My starter is quite runny. It's kind of pancake batter consistency, and I use a pint of starter. Now this actually isn't my original starter because I haven't made one for 12 years. I thought I probably ought to have a go. So last Sunday I started a new starter. So this is a new starter. This is its virgin bake. Smells all right. It smells a bit banana-y. So we'll see if this one works. This is a bit of an experiment. So slosh in a pint of starter. Got some spare just in case I need a bit more. And then just mix it up. So I just do this very roughly. I can feel it's a little bit dry. And again, this is just an experience thing. So you can see it's coming together, but it's my my starter's probably a little bit thick. So there's not quite enough liquid in there. So I'm just going to slosh some more in.
It's a much wetter mix than normal bread, isn't it?
Yeah, with sourdough, the wetter the better. So if you make a normal yeast loaf, you'd make a reasonably stiff dough, but with sourdough, it needs to be fairly wet. The trouble I've found over the years is if you have it as wet as the professionals say it's meant to be, I just cannot get the thing then to stand up. It always just collapses on me. So I don't have it quite as wet as I'm sure a proper baker would, but still nonetheless fairly wet. So let's keep going with that, and that's coming together. Maybe just a little splosh extra. Okay, so that's it. So that's all the kneading I would do at this stage. So scrape off the excess dough. Dough scraper. I'll talk about implements in a little bit. Scrape that off, more or less. That's it. So I think the technical term for that is a shaggy mass, which sounds like something unpleasant growing on your roof or somewhere else, but it's just a roughly mixed dough. So I'm going to lose my starter. So then I just put a tea cloth over that and put that to one side for about an hour. Then after about an hour, I made this one at 9 o'clock this morning. It's looking like that. So not showing many signs of life yet, but it's kind of come together. So then I just give this a quick turn, quick fold. And can you see it's starting to look much smoother. So it starts to get a smooth kind of sheen on it. So that's done. And then I put that aside and I leave that for another hour. Put a cloth over the top. And then what you get to is this. So this I started, when did I start this one? I'm just a bit confused. And I started this one at 6 o'clock this morning. So this has been going for 4 hours and it's been folded a couple of times. So I don't know if it will show up, but you can see there's air bubbles which are starting to pop all out of it. So this isn't far off ready being shaped. Also, this is a bit different because I've actually made this one with a different flour, which again I'll explain in a moment. So just do the same thing. Just kind of flick it and fold it.
So you're doing that every hour?
There's all kinds of technical ways you can knead, but again, this is just the simplest way for me. Just flick it and fold it because it's a long process. It kind of self-kneads itself. So there you go. That's good to go. So what I would do. So my first part, my shaggy mass. So I'd make that. I'd leave that for an hour. I'd give it a turn, which gets me to that stage. And then what I do next before getting to this stage really depends on what I'm doing. So at the moment, lockdown, obviously around at home, I would probably every hour for about 4 hours, I would just give it a turn. So this has been going for 4 hours. This is nearly ready now to shape. I'll probably leave this another hour or so. But in the old days, when I used to go out to work, obviously can't be around folding it all the time. So I would just take this after its first fold and stick it in the fridge and would leave it then until I came home. So it's perfectly happy in the fridge for 8-9 hours or so. And then when I got home, I would then give it a quick fold and take it out of the fridge, give it a quick fold and be ready to go to the stage that this now is. A lot depends on how frisky your starter is and also how warm the atmosphere is. If you want a frisky starter, and if your starter is frisky, then actually often what you have to do is to slow it down by putting it in the fridge. So if I went out to work and came home 9-10 hours later and had left it out, it would have just exploded everywhere. So it needs to go into the fridge to be slowed down. If the air temperature is warm, it obviously works much quicker. So having done that process, having turned it, folded it 4, maybe 5 times, get to this. So this one, I started at 8 o'clock last night. I did the shaggy mass, left it for an hour, did the first fold, chucked it in the fridge, left it in the fridge overnight, got it out this morning at 6 o'clock, and then I've folded it 2 or 3 times since then. So this one is now ready to be shaped. So the way that we do that, copy. I use a couche, which is one of these things. It's a linen sheet, and again, I'll explain more about that in a minute. So I prepare that by sprinkling some flour on it. Put that to one side. Put a bit of flour on the table. And then take the dough out. Now this is, look at the stretch, it's lovely and soft and stretchy by this stage. And you don't want to squeeze all the air out of it. So I normally I stretch it out, fold it like that, stretch it the other way, fold it again. And then you want it to have a tight bottom. We all like having tight bottoms, so you want a tight bottom. So I just shape it in my hands like this, and then the way to get a tight bottom is by smearing it across the worktop, which kind of seals it. So I just slide it along like that. A bit of flour in my hands, stop my hands from sticking. So I do that a few times until it feels right and looks right. So it should have like a nice tight skin over it, which then helps with the rise. So then what you're left with is that, a nice ball. And then I stick that on the couche. Where's the camera? Where's the camera? I sprinkle that with some flour. Roll up the sides of the cloth, which holds it in shape. There you go, that's the shaped loaf. So what I would now do is, if I'm around like I am today, I'll just leave that like it is, and that will probably be ready in, well, it's quite warm, and it's the starter is particularly frisky because I've been using it so much this week. Normally, I guess I bake at least twice a week, and depending on how many of the family around, it might be up to 4 or 5 times a week if we're all around and eating lots of bread. And because I've been preparing all these different loaves the last couple of days, which has mean continually feeding my starter, it is particularly frisky. So I reckon this will probably be ready in 3 hours maybe. Sometimes it actually improves it if it is going very fast to put it in the fridge and slow it down so it has a longer maturation process, because that can give you more of that sourdough tang. So if that's what you're after, and if it is frisky, then you might need to slow things down. And then once you've done that, you come back and you have the proved loaf. So I'm not sure I can get them both in the frame. Not very easily. There you go. So you can see this one is about twice the size of the one I've just prepared. So in terms of timing, this one I started, mixed up the shaggy mass at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Did a first fold at 5, did that a couple more times, shaped it, put it on the cloth, went into the fridge at 8 o'clock last night, and it's just been there since 8 o'clock last night. I didn't take it out this morning because I knew it would explode. So the whole process has been, 16 hours, but most of that's actually been sitting in the fridge. The thing you do now is to get it in the oven. This is the exciting bit. Now, for what I found the easiest way to get a nice loaf is to use a casserole dish. This is a nice little casserole dish which got for €6 in a junk shop in France. So I will put the loaf into the casserole with the lid on, and I'll leave the lid on for 15 minutes. And then in my oven, and with the size of loaf I'm making, I take the lid off after 15 minutes, and then I leave it for a further 18 minutes. Now, that will depend upon how hot your oven is, what size loaf you're making. So you have to experiment a bit. But I reckon 15 minutes with the lid on, whatever you're doing, is good. That allows it to steam, which gives you that crusty crust which you're looking for. It helps it spring rise, and it gives it the hard crust which you're looking for in a decent loaf, rather than something which is soggy. After 15 minutes, take off the lid, and then in my case, it's 18 further minutes. Key to that is that your oven has got to be as hot as it will go. Bread likes to be as hot as it possibly can be. So mine's up at 220 in a fan oven. And the casserole dish, I'm not using this one, is already in there, so that is roasting hot. So you mustn't put your dough into a cold casserole dish because it will just stick. It has to go onto a hot surface. So you can also bake on trays or pizza stones, the same. They have to be hot or the dough will stick. So the way I get it into my casserole dish is thus. I have a pizza peel, and I slide my loaf onto the pizza peel. And then, very importantly, it has to be slashed. This helps it to rise nicely and also improves the aesthetics. It stops just some splitting. It helps to rise evenly. So I use a bread knife, which cuts very well. And I put a very deep slash in, almost to the bottom of the loaf. So there you go. Then I need to get my casserole dish out. So I might need you to...
hold the dish?
Casserole dish. I need you to move the camera. You're going to need to look on that screen. So no, just
to keep it picking up. I'm looking.
Right, okay.
Yeah, you can see.
So then I just slide the dough off the peel into the dish. Back on. Chuck it in the oven. Set the timer for 15 minutes.
Do you want to adjust that so you can...
Woo! Okay. Any questions at this point? We can unmute John and discuss together.
Yeah, you can just unmute yourself and ask your question. Matt, I'll ask you first. How can you tell if your starter is frisky or not?
Okay, so it's really, so I'm going to talk about starters. It's really, well, you get to know it, and it's, if it's bubbling nicely. So, you know, this is my one. As you can see, mine always separates. So I always, that's one. I always get that layer of liquid kind of separates. That's fine, but I can see that it's bubbling, and it smells good. And you'll know if it's not frisky because nothing much happens when you make bread. It will just stay flat. And the way to make it frisky is to feed it regularly. So in terms of the starter and how I keep this going, so the starter, I just had a pint of water, and then again, it's my ratios. This isn't, I'm sure a proper baker would say I'm doing it all wrong. I then use 4 heapy tablespoons of flour per pint of water. So when I made the starter last week, that's what I did. I just mixed up a pint of water with 4 tablespoons of flour, and then every day chuck half of it away, put half a pint of water back in and a couple of tablespoons of flour, mix it up, do that, and then after a few days, it will start to bubble away. You'll see the bubbles coming up, and it will start to smell. And people are often worried about the smell, but it should smell fruity because it is fermentation. So it should smell. This one is quite sour smelling. The new one I've made doesn't smell so strong yet. This one's a bit more banana-y, I think. This one is a bit more beery. So over time, when they start, so I think there's all kinds of different microorganisms working away and competing, and over time, it stabilizes and one begins to dominate. So I've seen tests done of old starters, and some of them can be decades old. I mean, some in Russia, they pass them from generation to generation, and it might be actually a very much more simple bacterial mix, whereas a new starter will be more complex, and it will start to find its way. So really, it's that. Can you see some bubbles happening, and the proof is in the pudding when you mix it into your flour? Does the thing rise or does it stay flat? I think one of the problems I used to have was I didn't have it frisky enough. I used to keep it in the fridge because I was worried about it going off, which it doesn't, and I wasn't feeding it enough, and then I was making bread and it was really hard work. So I keep it out at room temperature, and as I say, I'm baking at least twice a week, so that does keep it frisky. And then every few weeks, because the pot I got it in does begin to get a bit gunky, I'll just tip the whole lot out and tip most of it away, wash the thing out, and then put in a load more water and flour, and that reinvigorates it. So if it gets a bit tired, just by giving it a really good aeration, chucking away most of what you've got, keeping a bit, adding a load more water and flour, that's what works for me.
Great, thanks. Any other questions? Bren, I can see you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
Do you always use white flour?
Okay, that's going to be my very next point. So here I have two different sorts of flour, and I'm not sure how well this will show up on the screen. So this is the flour I normally use, and this is regular supermarket, cheapest, strong white bread flour. So if you can see the difference, the one I normally use is more golden, and also if you're able to feel it, it feels more oily, whereas the supermarket white is a bit drier. Now, here is a packet of Sainsbury's flour, which I bought for demonstration purposes the other day. So this, I think, actually makes the best bread in terms of it being the easiest to handle and giving the most predictable results. The flour I use is this, which is organic stone ground flour, which comes from Can Mills near Shaftesbury. Now, Grace and I are very fond of Shaftesbury, so normally, in normal times, 3 or 4 times a year, we'd go up to Shaftesbury for a walk and a wander and a coffee, and would pop into Can Mills and buy a 25 kg bag of flour. That's obviously a bit more difficult at the moment. He does deliver, but then you have to pay for delivery. At the start of the first lockdown, we did do a bulk order for our neighbours and bought tons of the stuff which he delivered, and we distributed around the road. But the flours are quite different. So normal commercial flour, this stuff, it's pure starch essentially. So it's milled very fast, and it's has everything taken out of it apart from the starch essentially. One of the so many people seem to have gluten intolerances at the moment. One of the suggestions is actually it's not gluten intolerance, it's intolerance to modern baking techniques. So this kind of flour is milled very fast and very hot between metal rollers. So it does get hot in the milling process, and that destroys a lot of the oils and stuff that's in the flour. And then commercial bread is baked very fast. So I think it only takes about an hour or two to make a commercial loaf. So it's a very quick process. Whereas obviously the sourdough press is a very slow one. It has a very different impact upon everything that's in the flour. And the organic stone ground flour is milled between stones, so it doesn't get hot, it stays cool, which preserves all the essential oils and stuff. And a lot more of the bran gets through, so that's why this is quite golden. So if you look at one of my finished loaves, you might actually think it's a brown loaf because it's much browner than a pure white loaf. The thing about this is it's much stickier, it's more challenging to work with, and it doesn't rise in quite the spectacular way. So if you want sourdough which has that classic very open structure, lots of lovely round holes in it, then the commercial flour is the way to go. But for the benefits of health, I prefer to use this when I can. So when we run out of Shaftesbury flour and can't get any, I will use this, but then I will make my starter with wholemeal flour just to get a bit more bran and texture into the loaf. So Sorry, Bran.
I've been making mine with Sainsbury's multi-seeded flour, half that and half white. But I'm just interested to know, can you buy that in or anything like it in bulk?
Yes, the canned milk, all that kind of stuff. Everything you would want. So the maltster and the multigrain and rye and spelt and yeah, so sometimes I make rye bread. When I do that, I do half and half. So I'd have half rye and half white, because if it's all rye, it's just much too solid. And if I'm doing that, I'd normally chuck other things in. I'd chuck pumpkin and sunflower seeds in, and maybe some raisins, that kind of stuff. So it's much more of a kind of a seedy, fruity type loaf. So it's just experimentation. Mix it up and see what works for you, see what you like. The other key ingredient is salt. And again, people have different theories about salt. A normal table salt is pure, which makes it very predictable. Usually has anti-caking ingredients in it, which some people say gives a funny taste to your bread. I'm not sure really. I use sea salt just because I like it and I'm a bit poncy. This is actually, it's in a Cornish sea salt box, but it's actually French sea salt. When Grace and I managed to get to France for 5 days last summer, there was a 5 kilo bag of French sea salt in the supermarket for about £2. So I bought that and have still been using that. So this is much grayer than table salt because it's got a lot more other minerals in, which will give a slightly different impact upon the bread. But I think probably adds something. I just like it. The salt, without salt, bread tastes horrible, and it also helps it slows down the work of the bacteria who are making the thing grow. So the more salt you put in, it will slow down the process. It also has an impact upon the gluten, so you get a more stretchy dough because of the salt. So you have to have the salt, but you need to work out for your tastes how much you want. Shall I talk about equipment?
Yes.
So I use one of these couche. It's a piece of linen. Get one off Amazon for £10. It's all other things you can do. You can use shaping baskets and all the rest. Again, for me, this is what I found to be the easiest, most predictable. This is actually a new one because I needed 2 for today. So I bought this last week. This one's very stiff. I think it will loosen up over time. The other one, it's getting a bit messy here now. This one's much softer. I've had this one probably for the last, 10 or 12 years. And the thing with these is you never wash them. It messes them up if you wash them. So whenever I've used it, I just shake it off outside. When the weather's better, I might hang it over the washing line to get it more shaken out. But it doesn't go moldy or anything. So I've been using this one, as I say, for 10, 12 years, baking at least twice a week. And just gets better and better. It matures and improves as the flour impregnates it. Don't be tempted to try and use a regular tea towel because it will stick. So the thing about linen is that the dough doesn't stick to the linen for some reason. So that's why you use one of these. So I would recommend one of those. Grace is asking a question.
Is the stiffness better for shaping, just for keeping the sides up?
Grace is asking about the stiffness of the couche, which is better for shaping. The soft one actually holds pretty well. This first use, this was too stiff, but I've used it a couple of times now and it's loosening up. These are great also if you want to make baguettes, which sometimes I do. So rather than using the casserole dish, I'll just bake it straight onto it. Actually, I've got the biggest ceramic tile from a tile shop I could find, which would fit in the oven. I use that to bake on, cheaper than a piece of stone. And we'll make baguettes, and these are great because then you just line the baguettes up, and then you just they don't fall apart. If you try and make baguettes just on a worktop, they'll. And then, as you saw, I use the peel to slide it in. If I'm making bread on the tile rather than the casserole, goes in on this and comes out on this as well. So that's really handy. And then a cheap plastic dough scraper. Those are my essential items. No, tiles elsewhere. Any more questions at this point? We have 2 minutes before the first.
Can I ask a question? Hi, it's Julie, Isabel's and Esther's mum.
Hi.
When you make sourdough with wholemeal flour, do you have to add more water? Because when we use wholemeal, we find that it dries the bread out a lot more and it goes much firmer.
Yeah, I would never use a pure wholemeal mix, because for me it's just too heavy. So it's much more difficult to work.
Yeah.
And I think it doesn't rise as well, and the final loaf tends to be heavy. So I'd always do at least half and half.
Yeah, we try half and half, yeah. But sometimes when we do wholemeal with the starter, we find it's a lot drier as a starter. So do you have to add more water then? Yeah,
so as I said, when I was mixing up my shaggy mess, it's just is a question of experience. As you're mixing it up, you get a sense of is this too dry, too wet, and adjust accordingly.
Okay, thanks. I'll mute myself again because my washing machine's very noisy. Cheers.
Can I ask a question, Matthew? Do you keep your starter sealed in a container?
Yeah, so I keep it in this Tupperware thing. So it's.
You keep the lid on?
Yeah, the lid's on, but it can
escape.
It can escape. Yeah, you're not keep them in sealed glass containers because they can explode if it's really frisky.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Actually, this was quite good. This was where's my lid? This is just a thermos flask type thing I use for the new starter. It's got a little hole in the lid. Absolutely perfect.
Right. Oh, but fermentation.
Yeah. Hold on.
Do you want me to bring the camera up?
Okay, so there you go. That's what it looks like after 15 minutes. It's risen nicely. See where I slashed it? It's opened up. So that now goes back in the oven for another, for me, 80 minutes. Won't rise much more, but will go a lovely golden colour. Right. Any other questions at this point? I've got some other things to demonstrate. Okay, while we're waiting for the 18 minutes to tick off, Grace is going to get involved now and help me. I'm going to fire up your room. And we're going to show some of the other things which we do with this type of dough. So I'm going to move this camera.
Are you going to talk about the sauce?
Yeah. Okay, so we use this dough for everything. So we use it for pizza base and we use it for flatbreads. So this was started at the same time yesterday afternoon as the one that's currently in the oven. But this morning I just divided it up into 8 little rolls. And what I'm going to do is roll them out, and then Grace is going to cook them. Now you could use a frying pan for this. We have this flat thing we acquired somewhere, and we just chuck that on the top of the hob and use that, but a frying pan would do it just as well. So let me roll. Showing?
It's showing a bit, you need to just twist it a bit.
Let's try that way.
Yeah, that's going to be easier.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay.
So if you're gonna use a frying pan for this, you don't want to put any oil in it or anything. It's literally dry, and you'll probably need your extractor fan because as you start making them, the loose flour in the bottom burns a little bit. But they are the simplest thing to do.
So I just roll it gently because I don't want to squeeze all the air out until it's like that, and then I do the pizza making magic, because you want it as thin as possible, but without squeezing all the air out. Without it all falling apart, and then whack that on top of the hot, and it's got to be hot. And with any luck, it should start to rise.
Just have to be patient. Doesn't take very long.
First one is always, it's like making pancakes. First one's always a bit of a nervous moment.
Can pick it up a little bit.
Starting to smoke.
So I don't know if you can see, but it's actually really still nice and puffy around the edges.
So you've got to wait until it's got some nice brown burnt bits on the side you're cooking. The griddle wasn't quite hot enough.
You can turn it more than once there.
Oh, she's flipping, she's flipping.
So the book that I used, which I think was River Cottage as well, says you want to turn it a few times because you want the air, you just want the air pockets to start opening up. So yeah, you can, and basically the hotter your griddle is, the quicker these will cook. Because this wasn't quite hot enough.
So when it gets properly hot, it should usually get nice big air bubbles, a bit like a pita bread.
You go roll another one because the second one might be better. The first one's not usually the best one. Put it in the sink. You can see that. I'm just going to hold it.
Camera troubles.
You can see that all right. Just hold it. Right, we're trusting that the second one will cook a bit quicker than this one. But you can just keep checking it, check it's not burning.
So second one rolled out gently. Giving it a stretch.
Don't put it on there, just look.
Disaster.
It's not going to be a disaster.
Not stretched.
Oh, okay. Put it on. Can you fit it on? Fit it on the back. Just take it off.
Okay, while Grace is doing that, I'll just show you the salsa that we use to dip this in. Adjust my camera angle. Okay, so I have just fried up some onion, some garlic, some chili. I've used fresh chili, but of course you can use dried. I put some herbs in there, salt and pepper, dash of Worcester sauce. Just scrape it into the blender thing. And then I put a tin of chopped tomatoes. That goes in. Put the top on the blender. Oh, wrong way around. And then just give it a very quick blitz, because I don't want all the texture to go. I want it to have some texture. So that'll do. So that gives our salsa, which we dip the bread in. Absolutely delicious. Summertime, having a barbecue, flatbreads, bit of tomatoey, herby, oniony salsa. Absolutely fantastic.
Okay, there you go then. The second one cooked in exactly the same time.
Right, here we go. So that's kind of what it looks like. That one's a little bit flatter than it should be. It should have some bigger air pockets.
This one's better.
She'll notice that.
So this, I can't. Oh yeah, there. This one cooked in. I put it on quite a bit after the first one, and it's cooked in the same time because the griddle was hotter. So you do have to make sure you're putting it on a really hot surface. But it stayed really puffy, and it's got a nice kind of brown colouring on it where it's hit the griddle. But again, you can just try it and see. So the first one, just try it, and what you want is not to be too sticky in the middle, and then you've got your lovely salsa.
Let us break bread together. That's delicious. Wish you could be here.
Very good.
Oh, chili's quite hot.
Do you want me to keep making those?
You keep making them. Okay, we've got about 7 minutes before the bread comes out of the oven. So, anything you want to chat about, or John, we can do a general unmute and chat as we wait for the last few minutes.
Okay, feel free to generally unmute yourselves. If you have any questions, now is your time.
Do you ever use spelt flour, Matthew?
I tried it once. Again, it's a lot more tricky because it doesn't have as much gluten in it. So you don't get. It's a friend of mine who's a much better baker than me. You might Liam Thatcher. He came to preach a couple of years ago. He came down, he brought a spelt loaf that he'd made, which was perfectly risen, perfect structure. But I just can't get it to work. So.
What do you do with pizza? A pizza base? Do you cook it at all first?
No, so we do basically the same process as this. Do the proving everything and get it thin, put it on a greased and floured tray, and then I don't pre-bake. I don't think it really needs it. You can do, but we just chuck the stuff on top and go from there.
It does. It makes really, really lovely pizza base. Actually, it's very tasty.
I think that'd be better.
Can I make a comment about a radio program I listen to? John?
Go for it.
Okay. Middle of the night, one night this week, I had the World Service on, World Service BBC, and there's a program called The Food Chain. And this week it was about sourdough bread makers. And the star of the show was a woman in her 80s who lives in the Yukon and has had a very distinguished life of public service. She's been mayor of her town and done all sorts of stuff. And she's the guardian of the family's sourdough, which is a direct descendant of the sourdough starter, which her ancestors brought to the Yukon in the gold rush, the Canadian gold rush of the 1890s. And it's still the same sourdough starter going on through the family. And she has just one grandson who is 10. And she's told him very firmly that he's the guardian of this sourdough starter. And when she's too old, and she makes bread and cinnamon buns, and she said chocolate brownies with this sourdough starter every Sunday. And she said from when she gets too old, this boy has got to take it on. I was quite impressed by that, 1890 something, and still the same direct link of sourdough.
I heard the same program.
Were you awake in the middle of the night?
Yeah.
It was lovely, wasn't it?
It was.
If anybody's struggling to get a starter going, you're very welcome to have some of mine. Let me know, and
Bring it round.
Bring round a receptacle, and I can give you a dollop.
I'd rather have some of that salsa.
Very welcome, Kate. Pop round.
Perhaps you could run around afterwards with the flat salsa. There's a bit of pastoral care here.
It's quite hot though. 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
Matt, where do you buy your chilies and garlic from?
Wherever we happen to be shopping. I popped into Sainsbury's in Old Town yesterday.
Okay.
The one reason to go to Poole High Street, which I know can be hard to imagine any reason to go to Poole High Street, is that Greenslade's fish merchants have opened a new shop in Falkland Crescent, just behind the Dolphin Centre. The council have taken the rates off some of the units down there to try and get people in there rather than all just being empty and hideous. And they do great fish. So we have started eating a bit more fish. So yesterday I got some sardines, which are very cheap, very lovely.
Are they open all the time?
Yeah, Monday to Saturday.
Ooh, ooh. Ooh.
But on their Facebook page, they've started advertising what they've caught that morning as well.
Yeah.
We do the local stuff, so if you like local shellfish, I have all that. Have a lobster tank, mussels, oysters. We had a winter barbecue last weekend. Got some oysters on the barbecue. Delicious.
They're paying you too much.
Butter and garlic sauce.
Go away.
They're not expensive.
Pardon?
They're not expensive.
Are they?
Wow, it's like buying a coffee out, isn't it?
It was Valentine's night. Half a dozen oysters.
Yeah.
I think I prefer them cooked. I have to say, I prefer them, hot.
I think it was a tenner for half a dozen oysters. Couldn't even go and get a pizza for that, could you?
No, that is true.
It's all about context.
That is true. I'll be there. Gosh, I'm looking forward to coming round to your place when I can.
Yeah. We had squid as well the other day. That's cheap.
Delicious.
It's horrible.
Amazing.
We should do a squid cleaning and preparation session sometime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're quite tricky to deal with. Well, not tricky, but they can feel intimidating.
Crab one. Cooking and prepping a crab would be good.
A crab. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've done that before, but not for a while. Yeah. Definitely worth that because brown crab's amazing.
Doesn't it make your house smell?
Not if you clean up afterwards.
Nobody does.
You want to time it. You want to time it for the week that the black bin's being collected, especially if you're doing it in the summer. We've learned that by experience. You don't want that shell hanging around. So we tend to do it at the weekend just before we know the black bin's going. Yeah.
The fortnightly bin collection is a nightmare. If you have mussels 2 weeks or just after the bin's been collected and you've got another fortnight, not good.
Don't do that.
We've done that.
Yeah, it's not nice, is it?
Try and seal it in several bags, you know.
I used to put it in the freezer till I put it in the bin.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea.
I used to put it in the freezer if I had room. Like we used to get, we were given loads of mackerel, and when you cleaned and gutted those, if it was the day after the bin,
and then just put it in a bag.
So I used to just put it in a bag, very obvious what it was, in a bag in the freezer, and then the night before put it in the bin.
Oh, that's genius. That is brilliant. That'll stop. Yeah, well, there you go. Top tip there. There you go.
Ta-da!
Okay, there it is.
Oh wow! Can we have some?
Where's the marmalade?
Well, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got another 4 loaves I've got to make today, so I was going to distribute it.
How much are they? I'll come and buy one.
We'll bring it round.
I'll
See the difference.
swap it for a hug and a kiss.
Oh, I've had my vaccine. So.
And I've had it. I've got my antibody test. I'm fine. Yeah. So some people will go a bit darker, that more caramelized finish. I think that's about right for me. Nice hollow sound. Shows it's cooked. There you go. The sourdough loaf.
Brilliant.
Mm.
It's interesting because that's a totally different way from the way Alan's sort of. It's useful learning
Different, yeah.
because you need
I've been kneading it, which is quite hard work.
till it's window pane effect, and that really has been
Mm.
hard work.
They've come out nicely, but it's a
Yeah.
less stressful way of doing it this way.
I used to do that, but then spoke to some people and kind of experimented more. And because it's a long process, it does all the glutens stretch. So as long as you're giving it that regular fold,
Yeah.
and also the folding rather than the kneading means you don't lose all the air, because you want to keep it as airy as possible.
And you keep it in the bowl to fold it, don't you? Which makes much less mess.
Yeah.
The other thing is I put water in mine, but you put more starter in them. You don't put any water in, do you?
No. Yeah, so some people will do it with a smaller dollop of starter,
Yeah.
water, but yeah, for me, it just works to have the larger quantity of starter and whack that in.
That would be better actually, because otherwise I'm wasting some starter each time I do it, you know? Because you're only putting in, say, 150 grams of starter. Well, you could put a lot more in.
Yeah.
Get better taste.
Yeah.
Sue Hosier, I don't know if it was you who asked about the marmalade, but Carlos Bertrand is making a batch right now, and it is absolutely beautiful. So you could pop round to Matt's, get your bread, pop round to Carlos, get your marmalade. We'll serve you a coffee outside here.
Oh, wouldn't that be fun? That would be so nice.
What colour marmalade do, Richard?
I don't know what. Yeah, yeah, it must be Seville, but he just uses just the right amount of little bit of ginger. I think there's a little bit of cinnamon in there as well. It's just beautiful.
Ah, gosh.
I made a load of marmalade, but I think it's too late to get any more oranges.
They're done, aren't they?
Oh,
Oh, she made beautiful loaves. Anna makes sourdough bread.
I'll get a loaf. He's just made one.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else sourdough related we want to discuss, or are people happy?
I'd like to just, sorry, I'm just thinking.
John's going to put the video up on our YouTube channel so you can go back and check it.
Okay. This is for Sarah.
All right.
That looks good.
Yeah, it's harder work though than yours.
It's much harder work than yours.
That one's for Sarah, so we haven't got any.
Okay.
Yeah.
How often do you
How
feed
you
your
go, much
sourdough?
easier.
So how often do I feed it?
How often?
So, because, as I said, because I'm baking regularly, I don't feed it between. It's being fed every time I bake. But yeah, if you're only baking once a week, then I think you need to feed it probably twice more during the week to keep it frisky. If you leave it the week and then you use it, that's when it's really hard work because it just doesn't have enough life and it takes forever to get going. So
if you take off a pint, how much does that leave you with to refeed at that point?
well, it's not an exact measurement with me, so I keep it about that full. So there's probably a pint and a quarter, I should think, in there.
Yeah.
Maybe a pint and a half.
If you take a pint out, you're putting a pint back in.
Yeah, so I would take a pint out and then I'd put slightly less than a pint of water in because obviously then you're making it up with the flour and otherwise it keeps overfilling. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Do you make your bread when the starter's hungry?
Do I make my bread when the starter's hungry? I make it when it's as fizzy and lively as it possibly can be.
Oh, right.
I'm baking every other day because we seem to manage to eat a 500 gram of flour loaf in 2 days, which is pure gluttony, I think, but it's boring, isn't it, in lockdown? So we eat sourdough and I make lots of sourdough.
Wow.
Good. Have you got one of yours to show us, Bren?
I've got a half. A minute.
We need the show and tell.
Matt, the container, is it airtight? You completely seal it?
Yeah, Kate asked that earlier. I don't think it's not. It can bubble out. I often leave one of the flaps open to give it a little bit so it's not completely sealed.
Okay.
But because it's plastic, if it does, it just swells rather than explodes.
That's my loaf.
Oh, that's
Look at
good.
that.
Oh,
That's
lovely.
beautiful.
You should have been doing the demonstration, Bren.
I do an easier method than you, I think, but I
Okay.
got a good starter from Tony.
So what's your method?
My starter's thicker, so I put 150 grams of starter, 250 grams of warm water, some olive oil, some salt, and 500 grams of flour, which is half seedy and half white, and make the shaggy mess, and then fold it 4 times after an hour, fold it 4 times after an hour and leave it in the fridge overnight. And then in the morning, I get it out, shape it, put it in a shaping bowl, again, kindly donated by Tony, and leave it for 3 or 4 hours, 4 or 5, often sometimes in the fridge, and then cook it just before we eat it at tea time.
Nice.
Okay, that's pretty similar, isn't it?
It's much easier to work though because it's not as sloppy as yours.
Yeah, that flour is sticky. Yeah, so this is the one that was done with the regular supermarket flour, and that's easier to work.
Right.
They've got so much more gluten. It's so stretchy.
That is.
which is why you get get the nice big holes.
Yeah, mine isn't as soft as that though. It's a much stiffer dough.
Okay.
That's the brown in it.
Yeah, so your brown, your seeded bit will make it stiffer, won't it?
Right. Yeah.
I think we're putting similar amounts of liquid. Do you say you're putting 500 ml in altogether of liquid?
I put 150 of the starter and 250 of water.
Okay, so it's a little bit less than me, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I've gone for a slightly sloppier mix.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, so I get it as sloppy as I dare until I can't work it or it collapses.
Fascinating.
Okay.
Yes.